celebrating 9 years of podcast excellence. The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Wrestling is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us.
Here we go, Wrestling is Real podcast, episode 679, and I want to go ahead and properly talk about the career of Scott Hall. Just make some comments on it. Everyone else has really eulogized and said their things about it. When I look at the career that he left behind, well, first of all, before anything else, nobody wants to talk about this. But what's very unfortunate is that Scott went through so much in his life, and all the things that he did to his body, all the things that he put himself through. I mean, we don't know everything, but I imagine in the World Wrestling Federation as Razor Ramon, back in the AEWA as Big Scott Hall. Listen, the guy was jacked. I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Hall had used performance enhancers at that time, because they were in, and everybody used them. Also, we know that we saw the ESPN 30 for 30. We know that he was, for a long time, he abused alcohol. He used painkillers. And he had the rehab for it. And he had to work his way back so many times. It took a toll on him. It took years off his life. Now, it doesn't say anything about what happened to him and the surgery that unfortunately caused complications, caused heart attacks, to put him into life support. And for those out there, when I heard of life support, when I heard the news about it, I could hear like Busted Open. I can hear, Bully Ray and Dave LaGreca talking about hopefully he kicks out of it. If you're on life support, I don't know if there's a way to feel like anybody's going to come back from that. It's almost slim to none chances. So at that point, I felt like, listen, the family's already doing the right thing. Let's get everybody together, make sure they're there for the last minutes, and just pay respects and just be there for when they have to say goodbye. And it sucks. I don't like talking about this stuff at all. I don't like talking about this. But this wrestling show must pay tribute to him. New York Times wrote a really wonderful article about him. I mean, it's quite the obituary, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, I want to go through this because it was really very well written by Derek Bryson Taylor. WWE called him a hugely influential superstar. We knew him as Razor Ramon. I knew him as Big Scott Hall. I knew him as Diamond Stud. I knew him as Scott Hall, the NWO, and the NWO Wolfpack. "63 years old is way too young." He suffered complications of hip replacement surgery this month, according to Pro Wrestling Torch. And he had been on life support in Georgia following 3 heart attacks over the weekend. Kevin Nash put out an Instagram post saying that Scott's family intended to take him off life support. He started in 1984, working his way into the American Wrestling Alliance under Vergagna. By the way, I was really amazed on how he definitely looked like Magnum PI at the time. He looked like Tom Selleck, but a big jacked up Magnum PI. And he got to work with one of the greatest in a tag team in a very early part of his career in Kurt Hennig, who was also just learning his way through. But really, those two guys, Hall of Famers, each on their own, and also too early to go. So the World Wrestling Federation, 1992, he debuted as Razor Ramon. His character influenced by Al Pacino's portrayal of Tony Montana in Scarface. If you watch the movie, you absolutely know it's true. Now, moving along into this story, 1996, he joined World Championship Wrestling under his given name, joined the New World Order along with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, changed the face of wrestling forever. A new world order of wrestling, brother. And that theme will ring true later on tonight when we talk about AEW, because it's there. Scott was born into a military family October 20th, 1958. He did grow up, as he described, with alcoholic parents. He worked as a bartender in a strip club in Orlando. 1983, he was involved in a struggle in which another man was fatally shot. He was charged with second-degree murder. Case was dismissed because of insufficient evidence. He had a rough life. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as Razor Ramon and also as a member of the New World Order. And he said, quote, "I learned that when I stepped through that curtain that I could have had a relationship as a performer with an audience. And it was a powerful thing to me, whether I was the hated villain or the beloved hero. That was something I've always treasured. And in my lifetime," and this, you will hear this, this quote will reign forever when we hear this. You will hear this all the time, because I'll tell you, what an amazing quote. "In my lifetime, I've learned hard work pays off. Dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do." That's what I'm going to say about that. Scott Hall was such a figure on my TV. Listen, if Scott Hall was on... Now, I never got to watch when the NWO rated WWE, because at that time, I was pissed off. I didn't like when WCW folded. It bothered me a lot. The competition fell. They lost. And I was kind of bitter about it. It was really tough for me to go watch Spike TV and go watch Raw and SmackDown. I couldn't do it because I knew they were going to screw up the invasion. I knew that if WWE got their hands on WCW talent, a lot of them were going to go by the wayside and it was going to go bad. And even if WCW wasn't that good at the end, it doesn't matter. Because Hogan was still around, even though he wasn't there. Nash, Hall, like, you could still take those stars. There was just so much value to all of them in WCW, even though they were so badly booked at the end. And, you know, it was just a horrible time. And remember, all those guys were under contract. They all sat out. They didn't have to work anywhere. They weren't going to get used. They knew that the company's going to shit, and it was falling apart. And they were waiting to see if Bischoff was going to come in, swoop it up. It never happened. But, man, Scott Hall, the initial voice to initiate one of the greatest storylines of our age of professional wrestling. You don't know who I am. You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. And I'll tell you, I was so pinpoint curious when that happened. What was it? Steve Dahl and Larry Zbyszko was calling the match, and I forget who was in the match, whatever. And I just remember seeing Scott Hall come in. Like, man, Bischoff, still in the New Japan Pro Wrestling gimmick, but really well done. An excellent, excellent job. And, man, I'll tell you what. That whole storyline, February 96, uncensored, all the way up to when we go to MGM Studios, and they're just like, I mean, that storyline was so good. They never had to get so bloated and big. Like, they could have kept it at like 6 and maybe Big Show. But they did grow so much. I mean, and obviously, what can you do? You're going to keep bringing in members after members after members. And the truth is, Bischoff and what he did at that time, you kind of feel that with what AEW is doing right now, with the constant flux of, like, here's new talent, here's a new face, here's a new face, here's a new face, here's a new wrinkle, here's a new wrinkle, here's a new wrinkle. But it's not so much where it's like shock and awe, shock and awe, shock and awe, because WCW was going head to head in cable ratings when live TV mattered directly into the jugular of WWF at the time. And they did. And I'll tell you, World Wrestling Federation, they struggled. And, you know, it took a little while to go and see that Stone Cold was going to take off, and they still had the great, you know, the great talent when it comes to Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, and, you know, that Attitude Era needed to spawn. That shit, listen, when I look at what Scott Hall did, like, I never think of Razor Ramon when I think of him as much. The Razor Ramon gimmick was great. But it was only for so long. And remember, there's people that are in WWE, and because it was a WWE character and that gimmick was such a big deal, yeah, then people are always going to talk about the Razor Ramon character. But for me, that was a great part of his career. But the highlights came when he was Scott Hall. When he was with the Outsiders, WCW World Tag Team Champions, that's what mattered to me. That's what I felt. That's what really brought me to the forefront of like that enjoyment of the best that WCW was. It was like, okay, we're getting across the hump. Nitro is now taking off. And I couldn't miss that show. 7:55, 7:57, whatever Bischoff did to go and fuck with the timing, I was in. And that's, you know, that's a 3-hour show of Nitro. At that time, I could watch. And by the way, it wasn't necessarily like you were like jam-packed with matches. It's not like AEW does where they jam-pack the damn roster and they just like every match matters. That's the thing. AEW, they have matches that matter. All their stars matter. Everybody has storylines. Everybody is built with significance and there's an importance behind them. There's integrity behind every character they have, almost always. Even down to the jobbers that you watch on Dark and Dark Elevation. I mean, really. But when I look at what WCW was, it was the conduit. Remember, New World Order was great. And like everybody else talks about, you know, Attitude Era, yeah, there's all these great gimmicks, but it was sandwiched around all the wrestling they had. And the truth was, WWE or WWF at the time didn't have the best wrestling out there. They had good gimmicks, they had good storylines, like some decent, good promos. They had a lot of sex and, debauchery on there, which is what people liked. It was that Jerry Springer time. You can't do that now. But what I can tell you is, what they did, WCW always had an affinity to me because in between the New World Order storylines, you saw great matches. Because we still had Jericho, Guerrero, Malenko, Benoit. Disco Inferno I enjoyed. Norman Smiley I enjoyed. Alex Wright. Lord Steven Regal. There was just a roster of stars there. You still had the Horsemen. You still had Ric Flair out there. You still had Arn Anderson still working. Like, there was still things where I enjoyed that all together. Lex Luger. Sting. All of it. You still surrounded with so much talent that was there. And there was still a lot of young talent that got shit. Rey Mysterio Jr. All of that. So loaded with talent. And I look and I say, man, and this is before ECW stars started making the fray, when Public Enemy made their way in, you know, and then you saw Raven, right? It was all before that. But man, at that time, the nucleus of that roster was really damn good. I mean, and they had certain stars that just had like certain affinity. Like, they were not that good, but I mean, what can I say to watch them? Like Scott Norton, I took him for granted. He was underrated to me, but he was fucking good. I mean, that guy was just big, tough wrestler. He just was a kind of like a little bit basic to me. You had the Steiners still out there. Steiners were fantastic. And then the whole change of Scott Steiner. Like, we never talked much about how well they did transitioning Scott Steiner into the Big Papa Pump character, which I believe very much was inspired by NWO. And if I'm right, Scott Hall actually was behind a number of characters. Remember, Scott Hall is the inspiration to make Sting turn to the Crow. Scott Hall's idea. And if I'm correct, I don't know if Scott Steiner was inspired by the Big Papa Pope character from Scott Hall, but Scott Hall came up with a lot of ideas that did transition certain wrestlers to evolve and get another lease on life as wrestlers. So Scott Steiner, we almost forget how much we remember him as a tag team competitor doing the Frankensteiner, where he very much looked like the current day Braun Breaker, right? And you look at Scott Steiner now, and what we remember with the vulgar promos and all that shit. That was at that time when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and all those people, the NWO, they controlled everything. And listen, for them, all the credit due, they had billions of dollars in their pocket. They only had to work so many dates. They had the creative deal they had because of what Eric Bischoff put in, which probably did well for his career. Because Scott Hall, for the most part, never got truly injured a lot. But the one thing that happened was that the excess and having all that money and just being that popular and everything, it took a toll on him. And you know what? When there was not that much discipline going on in the locker room, then things were not going to go well. And, you know, bad habits come back to haunt. I kind of feel that's what happened to Scott Hall. But then everybody else went through that. it was not the best of locker rooms over there in terms of like, it was a frat house. It was a party there. The guys that were on top, they were like there with the autonomy. They had the monopoly of what they were doing up there. Creative control had their contracts. They had to be used. They had to be booked a certain way. They couldn't be losing, which inadvertently helped the way that certain stars were booked, because it mattered if Scott Hall lost or Kevin Nash lost. Like, I still remember when Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Kevin Nash. Upset. That was a big deal. Big deal. And so there was part of that. But, it was enjoyable. He represents some of the best times I had watching wrestling when I was so into it. And because you were like, we talked about it, dirt sheets and all that stuff. We were really into what was going on. We all were in the Attitude Era. We all were in the Monday Night Wars. Like, it was just fun. He was integral in that. And remember, it's only been what? We celebrated 25 years ago. The formation of the New World Order. July 3rd. It wasn't. Oh, I forget what day it was. It was right before 4th of July. July 1986. Bash at the Beach. 25 years ago, last year. And then we come back to this now, and I said to myself, man, it was, you don't make the NWA without him. Because who do you fit in that spot when you decided to make that group? I mean, sure, Scott Hall was part of the Clique. It was basically part of the Clique, part of the WWF in the whole set over there. And then this move to come over, and Bischoff being able to convince Hall and Nash to come through. I mean, it was what it was. It was just that amazing time to see through. And, he shouldn't have been wrestling towards the end. I mean, there was times where he was out there, had some moments where he went out to an indie show and he was just not in any condition to be out there. And it was when it was really one of his worst. It was like a Jeff Hardy Victory Road moment. But he could have very well gone the same way where, like, Jeff Hardy was able to go make himself back to where he was. He was able to rehab himself. Scott Hall did too. But, I mean, the rehab for him was tough. He accomplished it. He did get there. And for all the bumps he took on the road, I mean, he did a lot there. So, he did what he could. And so it was great to see what he was able to go ahead and contribute. I mean, he did so much. He was such an important figure in all that wrestling for all those years. So 63 years old is way too young. Thoughts and prayers with him, his family, the friends, and those who got to work with him and love him dearly. Sad loss. A new world order of wrestling. We talked about that with AEW at the time when they first came up. I've talked about that. A new wrestling alliance, if you will. At this moment, that new wrestling alliance is no longer as open as it was, because now AEW is coming to its own. They're not necessarily taking stars from other companies, and they're not necessarily opening the door for other promotions like a NWA or a Ring of Honor to let their talent in. AEW is now much more, I don't know if it's so much of they're still letting their stars work in other shows, but they're not necessarily going into the area of saying, okay, we're at the crossroads of saying, all right, we're enjoying this new renaissance of wrestling and what they're doing, where I feel like there's a bit of nitro into the shows that I watch and some of the big storylines, but yet I also see a different kind of show altogether when you're looking at all of the matches and all the storylines we're getting. I mean, it's at the moment, the formulation of what Tony Khan's created, you now seriously have a full complement of veteran talent that are building up the younger talent and vice versa. And that goes with almost every storyline I have. But then you also have great storylines with great matches that you have on a regular basis that they're doing. And it's amazing. They have it all figured out. Such a great work that they're doing right now. on a regular basis. And I look at what they're doing, and I'm saying to myself, they're hitting on all cylinders right now. Like, their pay-per-views are just on fire. You look at how they do everything. And sure, there's still some things that are going to get a little bit of flack because of, like, still kind of taking a little bit of shots at WWE, but not so much. I mean, you look at Chris Jericho, and he does the sports entertainer gimmick and the influencer as he creates the Jericho Appreciation Society. He mentions how he's always been a sports entertainer, not merely a pro wrestler. And he talked about being the most total package performer in the history of this business. I'm a pro wrestler who's never been legendary, never been a millionaire. As a legendary millionaire many times over, the only reason I was able to do this is because I'm not a pro wrestler, I'm a sports entertainer. And now he's using that, and you know what? That is an attack to go ahead and basically tarnish the phrase sports entertainer among the diehard fans. That's the idea. So why not? The matches tonight, you had the commencement of the Jericho Appreciation Society. A hot crowd at Fremantle Coliseum in San Antonio for Hangman Page and Jurassic Express against Adam Cole and Red Dragon. And I mean, just the crowd and the energy they bring off of that. The energy they had for Thunder Rosa defeating Britt Baker for the AEW Women's Championship. By the way, pay-per-view quality dynamite tonight with St. Patrick's Day Slam. Wardlow in a big post, in an angle in the match. The Pinnacle destroys Wardlow's chances to become TNT champion. The spot that he won in the Face of Revolution ladder match. And so he's screwed. And now Wardlow continuing to turn to be a full babyface. He's going to be so over when he does. The Hardy Boys together, which is what they wanted to be in the first place. I mean, they always keep getting split up and all, but you know, they get to be who they are. This work they're doing right now with the Hardy Boys, and they go after Private Party and they win. And working with all these different talents right now within the AFO. You got Butcher and Blade, and there's just a whole lot there where storylines are built in. And even this, like, we didn't have CM Punk on this night. We didn't have the House of Black on this night. There's a whole lot of stars that they rotate in, and the show stays fresh. And they're not ever afraid of bringing in new stars. Swerve Strickland coming back in, Keith Lee coming in, Jay Lethal coming in. They're not afraid of bringing new stars in on a regular basis. And it's the system is really great. Like, I can't complain about it. I can't diss what they're doing. It's just so strong. And like I said, Thunder Rosa, the story they gave, someone busted up and she made the point that it was at Freeman Coliseum. She had one of the toughest matches for herself in 2019. And now another legendary match in her hometown. 1 year roughly after the last St. Patty's Day Slam in the Lights Out match, when everybody remembers one of the best women's matches there was last year, without much argument. And Thunder Rosa gets a damn belt after a long reign by Dr. Britt Baker, who's already established as a major star in that company on the women's side. Doesn't need a belt. Thunder Rosa now wins this. And if I ever thought, you could kind of tell, the whole pageantry that came out, the all-female mariachi group was a nice touch. That was awesome. I loved it all. What a great moment for Thunder Rosa. She finally won that title, of which there's only been a few names that have been able to grace that belt. It means a lot. It's very prestigious. When they have certain stars, they really know how to book their stars, the ones that are booked right, and they're not slow and trying to again book stars when they're hot and when they need to be put up to the top. Thunder Rosa has been crowned. She's a big star now. Well deserving of that belt. It's great. It's wonderful. And every match, I mean, listen, now some people, if you're WWE fans trying to watch AEW, I understand if you don't feel like there's much to it and you're not really into it. And that's okay. I could go on and on about AEW, but I'm not. It's kind of a quiet news week. And the other thing, too, is that I'm not going to go ahead and just stretch out a show to an hour when I'm not going to go out and put some big eulogy on Scott Hall that everybody else did. But there are a few stories I want to go ahead and get in here before I wrap things up on the show. AEW, Deadspin actually put an article saying that AEW outmanias WrestleMania. I want to talk about this real quick. Sam Fells puts a couple of points about this, about the pay-per-view that we saw. And I want to just take this point across in terms of what we got here for the show itself. He says that trying to compare AEW and WWE is pointless and a bit too cynical. And I agree. There's two different things, even if they're in the same general industry. Because if WWE was everything it could be, there wouldn't be an AEW after all. No matter how hard I try, I end up back here. He's right. AEW is filling a void. It's not ready to be competition head-to-head. There's no way to do it right now. And really, as a company, that's where it is. The pay-per-views, he's worried that in the story here about the AEW overstuffs their pay-per-views with quarterly big shows, and where would it go from there? Well, Revolution had so many different things, including overstuffed, and it didn't matter. Tony Khan should put as much as he can into the shows, put as much as he can in these. Who cares? Because if they're going to be this entertaining, this good, this memorable, then no one loses. It's going to be hard to keep that level up. I will say this. We will get complacent at some point with AEW. And that's okay with me. They can't keep this up. It's like a great TV show that starts. I watch Dallas, right? The old school Dallas show. Okay, let me give you an example. Empire. Great first season. How do you sustain that and keep that stretched out for year after year after year? It's tough. So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, it's a matter of you can make this show put together, keep the storylines as they are, and you don't necessarily need to do any more than maintain where we are at. You know, I think that's where we are. He also says it's hard to ignore the juxtaposition that in some ways AEW's final salvo before WWE's WrestleMania and still the industry's biggest week. Khan and the crew would never admit to WWE having anything to do with how AEW goes about their business, but you couldn't watch Revolution and not sense this is what Mania should look like, whether it was intentional or accidental, because the intensity of the card, I mean, the level of quality talent and the matches and the storylines, that's what WrestleMania is supposed to be, but it's not. Huge title matches, he says, that might attract the casual eye, big surprises, ridiculous bombast, and panache to the point of camp, a calling back to the history of the industry, and moments that will live on forever, however they come. He's right. There's a lot of things I like so much about what they do in there. Even the dropping, the dropping of Danhausen on a regular basis with best friends. Okay, I laugh at that shit. He fits the right role. And there's just something where it is some camp. There's some, some jokey, whatever, some fun. Like, let me tell you, one of the best things I really enjoy of AEW, not just Dynamite and not just Rampage. I love Dark and Dark Elevation. Because you know what? They don't take that show overly structured and serious. Like when I hear, especially Dark, you're Taz and Excalibur, they're just having a podcast. And even Taz called them like that. Yeah, we're having a podcast here. We're having a podcast. And they're just having a good old time. Like they're still calling the matches casually, but they're having a good old time in the studio recording this damn show. And Dark Elevation also has his own thing where you got Paul White and Big Show, Paul White and Mark Henry, and Tony Schiavone in there too. And occasionally when Eddie Kingston was around, that show's just fun. Just fun. They're just having a good old time. They're all doing the same thing. And I hope we still continue to have that kind of level. But I know AEW is going to have to grow. It's going to have to continue to build to bigger shows. They have to continue to go and make more money on the broadcast deals. They're going to grow themselves as a company. So it will change. It will morph at some point. And that's okay too. Enjoy it for what it is now. And for once, don't criticize it. Enjoy this what this is. Now, AEW is recognized by WWE in part of the MLW lawsuit. They filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. Dave Meltzer reported that in addition to WWE's response, they included an exhibit to show that they are not a dominant monopoly, and the exhibit is the October 18, 2021 Wrestling Observer newsletter that covered a SmackDown loss to AEW Rampage in the ratings. And that was when SmackDown ran 2.5 hours, put them in direct competition with AEW. Meltzer tweeted, in the response to the lawsuit, besides the written response, they provided an exhibit. From a legal standpoint, WWE likely needed to point out that their efforts to get the lawsuit thrown out, it's unclear if the judge would throw it out. But there you go. They actually used the AEW as a catalyst to throw out a lawsuit. But that's also kind of like a shot at AEW to say, hey, you're kind of, pissant, but yeah, you got us for this one show. So we use one of our flaws, one of our missteps to benefit us. And that's what they did. So why not? That's what they decided to do. Now, one other story I want to bring up here before we're going to wrap things up is WWE is teaming up with the INFLCR to expand their Next in Line program. We've been talking about this and realizing there's a lot that's coming up with this. With that said, the story says that WWE is partnering with a Teamworks product and industry leading brand building content, name, and image and likeness business management platform for college athletes. So they're working with a brand building company that's going to help with their technology and alliances with more than 200 NCAA 1 division colleges and universities. They're going to reach out to all these student athletes under this this branding company to help monetize their name, image, and likeness. And they'll innovate how student athletes engage with the WWE brand while maintaining their NCAA eligibility. More or less almost like a PR marketing, enhancement agency firm that's going to handle things. And Paul Levesque was quoted in this saying that we're excited about the partnership that this will create as we'll continue to expand our Next in Line program and identify student athletes with an interest in becoming WWE superstars. There you go. So they're working on some big stuff here. Continue to work on this, but of course the infrastructure is being put into place. Now we got to work this down the line. That's where it goes. And that's the show tonight. Keep it short and sweet. Not much else. It's one of those 30-minute shows. Not much more. I'm not going to go ahead and stretch it out. Thanks for listening in. Catching another Wrestling Goes Real podcast. Come back next week for another Wrestling Goes Real podcast because wrestling needs us. Thank you for listening to the Wrestling is Real podcast. You can find all previous episodes at wrestlingisreal.com or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets, including Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Follow the King of Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at King of Podcasts, and search King of Podcasts on YouTube, or type youtube.com/JBRASCO951. This has been a presentation of the King of Podcasts Radio Network.